I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a very short introduction, and then I'll let you speak. And we also have students here joining, some students joining in person and some online. And then I'm going to make sure that we can have some time for questions for you. Does that sound good? Okay.
I understand we have like up to 2 hours, or I'm not sure what the entire time frame is.
Yeah, so we have around 2 hours. You can speak for around 1.5 hours, and we can leave around 30 minutes, I think, for questions. Sounds good?
Okay, great.
All right, perfect. All right, so I'm going to do a very quick introduction, but it's a very special honor today to have Doc Searls joining us from the United States here. Are you in Bloomington right now?
I'm in Bloomington.
All right, yeah, so he's streaming in from Bloomington. I first met Doc when I was a graduate student at Indiana University at the Ostrom Workshop. He was leading the Beyond the Web speaker series, and I also had the privilege of being part of the Cultural Commons working group with him. On paper, as I have shared with all of y'all, Doc is a legend. His blog has been widely read around the world and continues to shape how we think about the internet. He served as the editor-in-chief of Linux Journal, co-authored the Cluetrain Manifesto, and later wrote The Intention Economy, which I would like all of my students to read, which actually became a landmark work on a buyer-driven marketplace where customers express their needs directly and sellers complete and fulfill them, flipping today's seller-dominated ad-driven model on its head. Doc is also an award-winning journalist, author, and speaker with a background that spans business, broadcasting, podcasting, conference organizing, and much else. But beyond that, what I treasure most about Doc is his reputation. Beyond his reputation is the person himself. In person, he is even better. Kind, generous with his time, and always willing to encourage and mentor those of us just starting out. To me, Doc embodies what it means to cultivate and sustain a true community in internet governance, an example of generosity, openness, and intellectual curiosity. I'm very grateful for his support back then, and even more grateful to have him to be with us today. Today's topic is the case of MyTerms. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Doc.
Thanks a lot, Simon, and hi, everybody. MyTerms, I'm going to be immodest about this. I think it's actually possibly the most important development, should it succeed, probably since the web, and maybe since the mobile phone. I think it fulfills one of the original intentions of the internet itself. And there are many, many ways I could go down various streams on this, but instead I've been working on this presentation and generally I don't use slides, but I feel like I need to have some in this case, in part just to organize my own thinking about it. So let's click on, there we go. So the main problem that we have, and of course we're always trying to solve a problem, and in business we talk about solutions all the time. Well, what are we solving? The main problem is that we live in two worlds at once. We've always lived in the natural world here on Earth, and we also live in this new world. I mean, here we are. We are exactly 12 hours apart from each other, and also zero distance apart. This is entirely new to human experience, even though it's familiar to us now, and we could hardly live without it. This is a new world. Living a digital existence is not only new to human experience, we're going to have it. We maybe have it now for a couple decades at the most, maybe 3, since the web took off in 1995. But that's 3 decades, but we're going to have it for millennia to come, and we've barely civilized it so far. So that's our main problem. I keep clicking on the other thing here. Okay, one of these worlds is civilized and the other one is not. And And that's a basic problem. That's a challenge. And what we're trying to do here in this exercise is civilize this other world. So if we look at the world we're in now, of course, this is generated by an AI. I asked an AI to generate me an image of a person being observed at all times. We can do this in the digital world. We couldn't do it in the old analog one, not very well. But there's almost an iron rule. This is a slide I don't have, but it's worth writing down. An iron rule in technology, which is that what can be done will be done until we see what shouldn't be done and we stop doing it. Now, Shoshana Zuboff, who wrote a book called In the Age of Surveillance Capitalism, talked about her 3 laws, which she actually came up with in the 1980s when she wrote In the Age of the Smart Machine, which is a great book also as well. This is 40 years ago. She said this, that everything that can be digitized will be digitized. Everything that can be informated, which is being turned into useful information, will be informated. And then, not quite finally, what that turns into, we will create systems for surveillance and control. That's where we are now. And that's what she wrote the book about in 2017. So it's already 8 years ago. And we're still stuck in it. And she wanted to see regulatory answers to this. I think she's open to other possibilities, but we're in a regulatorium right now where it's not answering this. So there's also a side thing that happens with this, which is we now have an internet of nothing but accounts. And that collection of characters there is colloquial English for a curse word. But this is the world we live in. We have a zillion logins and passwords. And who we are and how we interact with all these different accounts is entirely different. There's no global way we can deal with these. We've tried to come up with some. There's a protocol called OAuth, O-A-U-T-H, which, and I know the people working on it, they did that at a conference I helped organize and in fact started called the Internet Identity Workshop. The idea behind OAuth is that we would have independence and scale across all of these. And what that gave us was log in with Facebook and log in with Apple and log in with Google. Shortcuts that put us inside, captive silos of all these different companies while we're dealing with these other accounts. And I actually wrote, and so if we look at privacy in this sense, all these different locks have their own way of giving you privacy. And that privacy is kind of a promise. But we don't have it really, because if your privacy is in the hands of others alone, you don't have any. And that's pretty much another rule. And now this is actually a story that I wrote. It's one of my many blog posts. I wrote it originally for Linux Journal. I wrote it again for my own blog. But that's basically the problem we have. And every time we try and solve this with consent or something else, it's going to fail. So let's look at this at work. Recently, I went to Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone is an American publication, mostly focused on music and entertainment, but they're trying to broaden out. And they all have this same thing. If you look on this, you'll see, VRM by Admiral. That's not the kind of VRM that I talk about, but we can go into that later. Support independent journalism. Ads keep our content free. And then in tiny print here, I don't support Rolling Stone. It's very passive aggressive on their part. And, the thing is that they think I have an ad blocker. I don't have an ad blocker. I block tracking. If you look at the top here, there's this little image here that says it's the number 56, and we'll look a little closer at that. That's Privacy Badger from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF. And I can selectively block trackers. In fact, I don't have a problem with advertising. I spent 20 years of my life in the advertising business, maybe more than that. For a while, I was a founder and a partner in the top tech advertising agency in Silicon Valley. My name was on a building in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley. It was a very successful company in the advertising business, but that's back when advertising wasn't based on tracking. Now almost all the advertising online is based on tracking you. So I'm only blocking tracking. So what's actually going on here with Rolling Stone? Because I want to look deeper into the surveillance system that we have. A company like Rolling Stone says they care about your privacy. They really don't. It's quite the opposite. So for example, here they're saying, in the second story here, Trump and Doge are trying to get around privacy laws to gather your personal information. So let's look at Rolling Stone, what Rolling Stone itself is trying to do. This is a service called Foo Analytics from Augustine Foo. He's FOU. He's in New York City, and he's a hacker and a successful consultant, and mostly in the advertising business, believe it or not. But he created this thing where he can look at called page X-ray that looks at what's actually happening when you open a page at rollingstone.com. And if you look at the bottom here, you'll see it's taking 17 seconds, 17,485 milliseconds. There have been 318 ad server requests, 229 tracking requests, 183 other requests. All of these are coming at you as cookies and tracking beacons and fingerprinting and other ways of spying on you. And you might think this is kind of innocent stuff because it's only advertising. You don't know. You know nothing about what's going on here. And that's on purpose. They don't want you to know. And by the way, the reporters don't want you to know either, because they know which side of their bread to butter is buttered on, and they never want to take on this issue. But only one in the history of tech journalism has actually taken that on. It was at the New York Times, and we can digress into that later if you like. But this is a picture of what happens, and this is in page X-ray. When you open your browser, all of this stuff is going in there. All of this stuff is being funneled in there, and information about you is filtering out through all of these trackers. And by the way, and in the background here, information about you is being auctioned off. That's basically how the system works. There's an auction system, and information about you is shared in different ways by different entities within this. Here's a closer look at it, and some of these are Google, and some of these are companies you may know. Here's some Google over here, but a lot of them, are just Dotomi, Rubicon Project, pre-bid server button. Most of it, you don't know who these companies are, but they are in your browser. You're carrying these things around like viruses all the time. That's how it works. So let's look at what I see on my phone, for example. I go to a lot of other journalistic entities, and so over here on the left is the Courier Journal. That's in a nearby city here, and they also have the same thing. I don't support independent journalism. Disable my ad blocker. Looks like you're using an ad blocker. I'm not. I'm just using a tracking protection. These actually block more than ads. That's Sports Illustrated, which is a formerly fantastic sports publication in the U.S., very august, very important, and now it's almost all clickbait and tracking. That's what's happened to it, because that's the only way journalism can make money these days, or one of the few ways. So that's one problem. So then let's look at another one. This is Flight Radar 24. So let's say they give you a way to manage your privacy, or so they claim, manage your privacy. I use Flight Radar 24 a lot because I fly a lot as a passenger, and I want to see when I'm going to pick up my wife where her plane is. I can see that on Flight Radar 24, very handy. So it says here, you're on the left, your privacy, do not share, sell, or opt out of my personal information. That's a weird way of putting it, sell or opt out. But anyway, you can agree and close. You don't even know what you're agreeing to. It doesn't say. We collect some sensitive and not sensitive personal data. Improving our products, delivering personalized ads. You can choose to opt out. A bunch of stuff. All of them say something like this. They're all a little bit different. They're all confusing. But let's say I click on this do not share thing. Then I get to this page where we and our partners do all this stuff, and commercial information shared with third parties retained for 12 months. And it's checked off, like, sell my personal information, use my personal information for targeted advertising, and manage our partners. If I click on that, by the way, I'll get into a gigantic page that has hundreds of companies I can manage I'm not really managing those. So I go in and I check that off. Okay, I say, no, I don't want that. And so I click on this and I pull it over, and then I save it and close it. I have no record of this. I have no way of finding out what's going on there. Supposedly they're Datomi in this case, their privacy management company, because they all hand off this work to other parties. They're keeping some record of what you've agreed to or not agreed to. How that's acted on, you have no way of knowing. This is not, there's no way to, maintain this or enforce this. Now, there's one company out there, only one big company that's actually making a big deal about privacy, and that's Apple. This is actually from several years ago. And they say privacy, that's iPhone. Beautiful ads. They always do beautiful ads. They talk about how, they'll blow, they show, a woman sitting there and surveillance cameras are bothering her, and then she clicks on something in her iPhone and it blows them up. So, and they have this, they will say, okay, and every time, if you have an iPhone, it has this, thing, ask app not to track. And why ask? Why ask? Why not tell them not to track? Why not keeping track of them not tracking? Now, in fact, Apple does have a setting. I'm not going to go into it, but there is a setting where you could just prevent them all from tracking you. But it's not obvious, and it's too complicated. The whole thing is way too complicated. And this is largely because of the GDPR and the EU. Of course, the internet is a worldwide network. The packets that I'm sending you, and we're sending each other right now, are passing through many countries, many different routers along the way. That's the way the internet protocol was designed. Some packets are failing and being resent, and maybe by different routes. But the EU they love making laws, and they've made one here. And the lawfulness of processing. There are three things that GDPR cares about. And for law students who are here, there are three entities: the data processor, the data controller, and the data subject. That's you and me, the individual human beings. What they call a natural person are the data subjects. So look at that a little more closely. And this is the Article 6 of the GDPR, the lawfulness of processing. Everything I just showed you is in this first one. The data subject is given consent to the processing of his or her personal information. And all of those are about consent. Now, what Google stands behind, and the others do in Europe, is the bottom one, legitimate interest. They say, we have a legitimate interest in providing services, including our advertising. And they get hit with a 4 billion euro fine. And they say, oh, that's just the cost of doing business. So it's, but consent is the thing that we're operating in right now. But note the next one, which is contract. We're going to get to that. So some observations about laws governing technologies, and I've been around this a long time, and so these are sort of my own laws. Most new tech law protects yesterday from last Thursday. That tends to be the way it works, and then it'll be with us for the next 10, 50, 100 years. The GDPR protects 2015 from 2010. It got finished in 2015, but it started on in 2010 and didn't become enforceable until 2018. And is still almost entirely circumvented, which is what we just saw. The CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, when the California came up with, protects 2018 from 2015 and didn't become enforceable until 2020, and is still also almost entirely circumvented. But what's that? Is there somebody saying something there?
Sorry, explaining to students. Oh, sorry, go on. I was just
okay. Sure, that's fine.
Explaining to students. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you following along with this? Am I making sense?
Perfect. Anyone has any questions? All right. I think we don't have any questions.
I hope you have questions at the end, and I'll try to be quick about it.
Right.
But these are, this is a bit of a digression, but when I was hanging out at Harvard University, I was not a professor there. I was just a fellow at a center there. I imagine as I was driving up the road between MIT and Harvard, that the thought balloon over MIT was the answer is technology, what is the question? And the thought balloon over Harvard, north of the river, because it's north and south of the river, the Charles River, the thought balloon over that was the answer is policy, what is the question? South of the river, the answer is the business school, and the answer there is the marketplace or money, what is the question? And it's natural for people in the lawmaking business to think that they are going to make a law and that's going to take care of things. So these are some observations about how law works. The EU's privacy directive, the original cookie notice regulation, was born in 2002, came into force in 2003, but didn't cause cookie notices until the GDPR came along in 2018. And lots of law firms said, wait a minute, we can make money in the consent management business by throwing cookie notices in front of people and getting their compliance with something that the GDPR was meant to prevent. So what we have is obedience to the letter of the GDPR and these other laws while completely screwing its spirit. The spirit of the law is not in the least way really obeyed. And the situation is as bad as ever, only more complicated now in 2015 because we have these cookie notices and it all becomes more weird. So how does privacy work in the natural world? Like I showed you at the beginning, there are these two worlds we live in. We live in the natural world and we live in the digital world. And the digital world is new. And it might help to look at the natural world and see how we do it here. So in the natural world, you know, privacy is what is called a social contract. A social contract is an English expression that's actually been around since before 1800, because I can look in Google Ngram Viewer and see books that go back all the way to 1800 to use the word, but it only took off really in the last 4 or 5 decades. And there are many ways to describe a social contract. These are 3 of them. What is a mutually beneficial agreement based on shared expectations and norms? Another is minimal and voluntary disclosure for constrained purposes. And mutual understanding of rights, privileges, obligations, ethical foundations, laws, context, and justifiable exceptions. And that's part of a much longer list. But we understand these things. These are things that go without saying, you might say. So, and this is a really important thing. And I can see your classroom there, and I notice all of you are wearing privacy technology. Clothing is a privacy technology. We invented it thousands of years ago, not just to keep ourselves warm, but to conceal parts of our bodies that we don't want to expose to other people, and also to signal what's welcome and what's not. What we wear at the beach and what we wear in a meeting are completely different things. What we wear at home is different. You know, we have these manners among us that are well understood. Another form of technology is shelter. We have rooms and we have doors and we have locks and shades and other ways of moderating our exposure, both collectively and individually, to others. And this is all very, very well understood. And if we, you know, and we have many ways to be private and public. This is actually shot way back in 2017. And I did this thing in a subway in New York City. I lived in New York for 13 years off and on. And it's what I call rectangle bingo. If everybody in the subway car is looking at their phone or plugged into their phone and listening with a headphone, I can actually, you know, do a pano of the whole subway car, and nobody will even notice that I'm doing that. Now, I'm in some ways invading their privacy, you might say, but it's a harmless thing, I would hope. But everybody's being private there, but they're also in the digital world, and they're being maybe public, maybe not, who knows? But it's very complicated what we do in the natural world and the digital world at the same time. So, and we actually signal our choices and preferences regarding privacy constantly and mostly unconsciously. We're not thinking about it. We're just doing it. It goes without saying again. So what this understanding is what's called tacit. Tacit knowledge is what we know. And what we know is gigantic, and we don't say most of it. You know, I mean, I may know, for example, that's a willow tree. I may know that's a copper roof on the upper right. I may know where the bricks came from. I know this is Central Park in New York City. I know how to row a boat. There are a bunch of rowboats up there in the top left. This is early in spring, a couple of years ago in New York City. I know the woman in the bottom right is going to do bubbles, and she's going to show bubbles, giant bubbles to people and kids. There's so much that we know, but we don't talk about. It's just we share this knowledge and we get along because we all have a common understanding. So there's a philosopher named Michael Polanyi who put this really very succinctly. And he said this, by the way, he wrote a number of books. He's a scientist who became a philosopher. He's primarily a chemist. And his brother, Carl Polanyi, is more famous, and he was an economist, among other things. And almost all of Polanyi's work is quote proof. You can't quote it, but this is the one quotable line, and it's brilliant and it's correct. We know more than we can tell. And the way he unpacks that, and is this going down? Oh, here we go. Yeah. What we know is tacit. For example, and this is worth going into, I may know what I'm about to say, but I don't know exactly how I'm going to say it. I may not even remember how I started the sentences I'm finishing, or how I'm going to finish the sentences I'm starting, or the paragraph that I'm speaking, yet somehow meaning gets across. How does that happen? Well, it's because I have tacit knowledge of what I'm talking about, and I turn that into something explicit. So what we can tell is explicit. So he makes this distinction between tacit and explicit knowledge, and this is going to be relevant to what we're going to MyTerms. Now, here's the thing, and this is so critical. Digital machines don't have tacit knowing or knowing at all. They can emulate knowing, but that's it. I have dialogues every day, sometimes all day, with various AIs. I'm a heavy user of AIs, mostly to do better search, but to bounce off ideas and things like that. And I know it doesn't know anything. It really doesn't, but it emulates it. And that sounds like it has tacit knowledge. It does not. It doesn't have that. Digital machines traffic in bits and bytes, and they obey programming. They have to be programmed. That programming can be very complex. It can be made in such a way that it can do art, and it can do poetry, and it can, pretend that it has real knowledge, and you can use it as if it has real knowledge, but it doesn't. It's a library with a mouth, and that's fine. But its programming is what's in there. I mean, basically, AI is a really gigantic database with really great programming. It's not much more complicated than that. Actually, it's complicated in the mechanical sense, but conceptually, it's not. But here's the key thing. So in order for personal privacy to work in the digital world, machines require explicit instruction. You can't just have somebody ask you, well, can you kind of get along with this? No. You actually need to program them. You actually need explicit instruction. Contracts are the only way we can make our privacy requirements both explicit and enforceable. And an interesting thing, and I got this, the Berkman Center at Harvard was actually at Harvard Law School. Got to hang out with a lot of law professors and law students there. And one in particular, Renee Lloyd, I don't have her name on here, but she deserves enormous credit. She pointed out, and others have pointed that out since, that the oldest laws we have are contracts. They're agreements we make with each other. A person makes an agreement with another person regarding, say, loaning a wheelbarrow, and, the other person will give her a $40 deposit, and you have a contract that says you lose that deposit if you break the wheelbarrow or something else like that. But contracts are these things that we make among ourselves that are kind of laws. And contract law, I think this is pretty much true everywhere, mostly concerns, how well a contract is obeyed or not. It mostly concerns disputes. And it can talk about what's fair, what's not fair, and all that kind of stuff. But contracts are a way we can make these explicit, and we can use contracts. And Renee had this idea, and we came up with, we being the project I run. I still run it. It's still located at Harvard. It's been there for 18 years, called ProjectVRM. I'm not going to digress into that, but we came up with this idea, which is, let's have personal privacy terms, and let's present those to companies and have them obey them. And then the IEEE, which is this gigantic organization, 150 years old or something, approached us. That's Customer Commons, which I'll go into in a minute, with the idea that, why don't you make those machine readable? Why don't we have a standard for machine readability of personal privacy terms? And there's a paragraph under here that you see, but I can unpack that. And here's what it actually says. Persons are the first parties. This is a complete switch of what we have now. in the business, in the tech business, everybody operating a server sees themselves as the first party, and you, the person, are the second party. But these are persons, and the standard does say persons and individuals. It does not use the term user. It does not use the term consumer. The drug business and the computer business are the only ones that call us users. We're not using somebody else's system here. We are being people. So we're the first parties, and we proffer the terms as contracts to sites and services. They are now the second parties. Both parties interact through agents, but an agent could be as simple as a browser on one side, on your side, and on the other side, a server add-on. If you're dealing with an app, it could be, you could have an AI agent, and there's a lot of conversation around AI agents here. But almost all of it is, no, you are using an agent that's provided to you by OpenAI or Google or Microsoft or something. No, you need your own agents that work for you. And we can digress into personal AI if we want. I'm very much in favor of it. We do not have it right now. We should have it. Money should be going into it. We don't. But the idea is that both parties will interact through through agents of one kind or another. And a browser add-on can be that. The terms is not like an infinite variety of terms. You're not writing them anew every time you encounter a website. They're chosen from a collection of standard form agreements, just a roster kept by an independent and neutral non-business entity. That is customer comments. I'll go into that in a minute. Matching records are kept by both sides in a form that can easily be retrieved, audited, or disputed. And the standard does not go into exactly how that's done. It just says that it needs to be done. The records need to match. You don't have a copy of the whole contract there. It points to where the contract was on the list, what the actual code of the contract is, by the way, whatever way it's defined. But they both have an identical one. It would likely be time-stamped, but they both keep a record that can be retrieved, audited, or disputed. And if a second party fails to agree, that is, the company fails to agree, a record of that can be kept by the first party. And that can be socialized, by the way. We can all agree, hey, Coca-Cola didn't agree to my thing. There could be social pressure brought to bear that way. But the whole idea is that we completely flip the script on the way agreements are done online. It's not consent anymore, where we're consenting to their terms, that we live in the world of nothing but accounts. No, they're agreeing to our terms, and we both have a record. And those terms obviously have to be friendly so that the other side actually benefits from it. We'll go into that as well. So the model for this is Creative Commons. Creative Commons was created primarily by a Harvard law professor named Larry Lessig, Lessig. He's a famous law professor and a good friend. And he and Aaron Swartz, who's no longer with us, and a few other people created Creative Commons. And that was after he lost the Supreme Court case here in the US. That's Larry. He lost the Supreme Court case called Eldred versus Ashcroft. That had to do with how long a copyright term would last. The US Constitution suggests 14 years. But the originalists on the American Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, say, no, it should be forever, or something like that. And if you look at the bottom there's all rights reserved. That's what copyright meant, and still does by default. If you have a copyright on something, you reserved all rights. What Larry and Aaron and others wanted to do was, what if you want to share, what are the conditions you want to share on? And I want to isolate one of those, which is this one here, called CC BY. That's Creative Commons. In other words, all you're requiring with BY is attribution. You put a creative work into the world. It could be a song, it could be a photograph, a piece of art, and all you're doing is requiring attribution. And I have a lot of experience for this because I'm a photographer. And these are some of my photographs on a site called Flickr. And most of these are aerial photos. I sit by the windows of airplanes and I take pictures of stuff. And I love geography. I like to publish that stuff. And I do that with that license, with the CC BY license, this one here, that requires only attribution. And There's hardly a month that goes by that some news story doesn't have one of my photos in it that says photo by Doc Searls. I've made money off of this. Company may come to me saying, I want to use one of your pieces of art, and I'll say, fine, you can have it for free. And they'll say, no, we want to pay you anyway. And not all of these, and many of these, thousands of them, in fact, as of yesterday, 4,000 on the top right here, 4,797 of these are in something called Wikimedia Commons. Wikimedia Commons is the staging site for Wikipedia. So any picture that's in Wikipedia has first been in Wikimedia Commons. It's kind of a holding area for that. And many of these photos here are in Wikipedia. In fact, it's possible I have more photos in Wikipedia than anybody because I use that Creative Commons license. So that's a model for us, that you have a useful thing that you can put into the world that allows civilization to improve in some way. So I mentioned earlier Customer Commons. At ProjectVRM, when I was at Harvard, we created Customer Commons, and I did that also at the time that my book, The Intention Economy, came out. And we copied this. At the bottom, you see those three squares, and this came from Creative Commons. It's their image. That you have legal code, which is readable by lawyers, basically. That it's human readable, meaning an ordinary person knows what it means, and it's machine readable. And it was because we came up with Creative Commons, and we were working on, and that's a nonprofit here in the US. And the idea was that it would be the place where terms would live, where our MyTerms would live. We didn't call them MyTerms at first. These are some MyTerms. This is just one draft of how it might work that says that, and these are very similar to, on the left in column A, an agreement ID. And if you look at the legend at the bottom, there's what's permitted, what may be permitted, what may be optionally done, what's prohibited, and what might be an obligation. But an ordinary person could look at that and basically they'll just choose one of them. They'll choose the first one, which now we're calling CC base, by the way, SD base rather. And what it says is just give me your service. The one across the top here, you're asking for a service. Okay, you think about this in the everyday world. You go into a shoe store, a store that sells shoes. You're not expecting anybody to plant a tracking beacon on you. You're there to look at shoes. That's the service. And you expect to walk out of that store. Maybe you've bought shoes. Maybe they have some information about you, your credit card, identification, some other things. Maybe they might remember you by face or whatever, but they have not surveilled you. You've gotten the service from them that you required when you walked in the store. It should be that way with websites. It should have been that way in the first place. It was not, because we invented the cookie. Phil Windley, who's one of my co-organizers for the Internet Identity Workshop, has a slide. And this slide is this. It says, history of e-commerce. A, the invention of the cookie. B, the end. Right? That's the history of e-commerce. It's all based on the cookie. We can move past that. And the first one just says, give me your service. And most of the websites of the world are not based on advertising. They don't make their money on advertising. They just operate a service. Or if they do have advertising, it's gravy for them. It's not that big a deal. And they're exposed legally if they're not really obeying the law. Not that it gets enforced, but that's the first one. But then there are others that you may allow. Again, if you look at the way the cookie system is set up right now, a site may want to do analytics, might want to do tracking, and you may want to allow, okay, this one here, SD by A, I'll allow analytics, or I may allow profiling. Okay, you want to profile me for your own purposes, okay, that I'll allow. That might be this one here, and then if you want to share data about me anonymously, there's that one, and then data portability is another one. And we added, at the bottom here, there are three additional ones where people can provide or donate data for specific purposes. One is intent casting, and Simon mentioned this at the beginning, that in the intention economy, we talked about intent casting. It's not called intent casting in the book. That name came along later. But basically, it's advertising in reverse. You are broadcasting to qualified companies exactly the car you're looking for, exactly the weird shoe size you're looking for, whatever else. I mean, and you can do that safely and anonymously. That's called intent casting. And so those might allow analytics, so those other things. Training AI. You may wish to train AI. I, for example, have no problem with all my works being used by AI to train them. I want my knowledge and my wisdom and my thinking to be in the world. And if the AIs are busy scraping all of that, that's great. Go for it. And then, and then public good. You can donate data for the public good. So this is early stuff. This is brand new. It's also being done in Europe, where they care about this stuff a lot. It's not being done in the U.S. But this is just a snapshot of one way that we're looking at this at a point in time. So let's look at the first of these. We go back to this SD buy. We're now calling SD bases. So if this woman is just telling the company, hey, I just want your services. You're selling any's. I want some any, okay? And just give me any, nothing more. And it signs, and you both agreed to that. And then, we have an agreement, and that's living in both places. And that's a basis on which services can be expanded. She can come back later, they can come back later and say, how about, it'd be nice if we shared this with this one party. What do you say? Whatever it could be. Negotiation can come later. The MyTerms standard only covers the first interaction. It doesn't cover everything that can happen after that. But it's one that gives the person parity with the company. This has never happened before. Generally, if you listen to the way that marketing talks about people, at least in English, that we are all targets to be acquired and managed and controlled and locked in. And they talk about us as being put through a funnel. That's the sales funnel. We don't think of ourselves as going through a funnel, but they do. So you almost could imagine that hand, instead of holding that pen, reaching out and grabbing that woman and trying to pull her in through the bottom door. That's basically the way companies think about things right now. It's a terrible way to do business, but it's what we have so far. So here's how it actually works. And just to show this in action, you have the person on the left. The person's agent proffers an agreement. There's a list of possible agreements, like the one I just showed you, on a public website that happens to be Customer Commons. That's the Customer Commons logo or symbol at the bottom. And let's say that's SD base. And the entity, because in the standard we call it an entity, because it could be a government agency, it could even be another person, but it's likely going to be a company or it's going to be a website. The agents both sign the agreement, which is they have a mechanism, and that's not specified. It just says this has to happen. Sign the agreement. The same record goes into both data stores, identical copies. That's it, okay? But that's how it works. So back in 1999, I, with 3 other people, put up a website that became very notorious called the Cluetrain Manifesto. It was so popular, and it was way before social media. It was just people sharing it by email, and newspapers and magazines writing about it. That it became so popular that we got a book deal very quickly. And so this is the book. That's the paperback version of it, and that's just one of many pictures of it online. And the way we see it now is, and by the way, marketers are the ones that make the Cluetrain Manifesto popular, because of a one-liner in it that I had been using since the 1980s, called "Markets are conversations." And they thought, wow, we can get conversational with people now, but they all do it differently because that internet of nothing but accounts, they're all doing it their own ways. So the way we see it now is that the Cluetrain, excuse me, I've got allergies and so I'm coughing here. I hit the mute button. Is bringing clues to companies with MyTerms. In other words, once you have MyTerms at work, there's so much more that we can give companies than what they can extract from us by spying on us. That's the idea here. So in 2012, I wrote this book called The Intention Economy, When Customers Take Charge. It was from Harvard Business Review Press. Somebody at that press, at that publisher, attended one of my talks and said this needs to be a book. So I wrote the book. It is the Wall Street Journal. I'm not going to show this. They had the book. They had me write something that took up the entire front page of the image of it took up the entire front page of the marketplace section of the Wall Street Journal, saying the customer as a god, and it was about intent casting. And it predicted what would happen in 10 years. That was in 2022, 3 years ago. It hasn't happened. Why not? Well, because surveillance got worse and worse and worse, and companies couldn't think outside of that box. So, but nonetheless, and this is where Cluetrain was a bestseller. The intention economy was not, but it got to the right people. So, for example, this guy, that's Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He invented the web. And Tim read the book, and he's devoted his life since then to something called SOLID, which is one of the protocols for making the intention economy happen. And this is from an interview on the right that came out yesterday about his new book, in which he talks about the intention economy. There's a whole chapter in there, and he mentions me about the intention economy. He wants to make the intention economy happen. How do we make it happen? We can't without MyTerms. And we haven't had MyTerms yet. I think if with MyTerms we can. So what's our first target? If you look at, the ad-supported websites, WordPress, has, a total of close to half of all the websites in the world are on WordPress. Non-WordPress is 56.6, so the rest of that, I guess, 43.4, I guess, put together. And but if you look at the WordPress ones that are supported by ads, it's actually a minority of that. There's still over 500 million websites in the world that do not have ads. They can easily agree and probably sit very happy with, yeah, I agreed with that. And once I've agreed, maybe I have something where we could build business on top of that. So that's our first target. We are not going after Google or any of the bigs. We're not going after, I think what they call the FANG, Facebook, Apple, Google and Microsoft, I forget, there's different initialisms for those. We're not going after the bigs. They can follow later. We're going after the easy pickings. And already, this is in the UK, somebody already came up with this is one of them, where they just say, okay, let's take the cookie notice we have already and add MyTerms for that. You can accept all cookies, reject all cookies, manage all cookies, or prefer MyTerms. I would rather put it right up top saying, use MyTerms, or do this, do the cookie dance if you want. But or a company could have, I just automatically have set MyTerms. You arrive at a website and you have a way of knowing that it accepted MyTerms. And they can know it this way. This is actually from an old browser, but we started talking about this back in the aughts in 2006, 7, 8, 9. This is one of the companies that it's a radio station in California. But the idea here is that in a browser, you can detect state. State is, hey, I'm in a state of relationship. I go to the KQED site and I can pop down a menu here that says, oh, yeah, I proffered SD base to them and they agreed. I see this as a sign of agreement. And I can see, we could actually have messaging going on here. We can look at the state on both sides of that relationship. And we call these, by the way, R buttons, are for read or relationship. And if you look back at what I had, I won't go back to that slide, we can later if you want, but we had that symbol in the slide showing a state of interest in relationship or presence of a relationship. And you could have ways on a website or on the Chrome of a website, which is the top bar of a website, that show a state of willingness to agree, for example. But basically we're dealing as even partners here, one-to-one. And we have lots of protocols to work with, and I'm not going to go into these, we can later, but I just want to show you, this is from one list that we have. This is like A through H, the A to A protocol, the Beckon protocol, which by the way is used in India. They can carry a MyTerms URI, a universal resource identifier. DID's a standard that was highly informed by the work that we've been doing. The Human Hypercapability Protocol, GNAP is another one. Then we're going, there's HTTP itself and HTTPS. JLink, which is done by a bunch of people who included the guy, Ian Henderson is his name, who created that grid I showed you earlier of all the different terms that we could use. That's JLink. Matrix OAuth 2.0, a later version of OAuth. Solid at the bottom there is Tim Berners-Lee's protocol. UMA, UMA, and web linking are two more. That's the whole list. It was too big for one page, so I put it on 3. So let's go over the advantages for business. There's reduced or eliminated compliance risk. Competitive differentiation. Hey, we accept terms. They don't. We do. Lower customer churn. Grounds for real rather than coerced relationships. Customer relationship management is a, I don't know, $100 billion, much more than that, business. It's really customer records management. There's no real relationship there. VRM is vendor relationship management. That's something I invented at the Berkman Center in 2006. We don't have it yet, but we could. We could start scaffolding it up. Grounds for better signaling. That is, clues going in both directions. Reduced or eliminated guesswork about what customers want, how they use products and services, how both might be improved. I'm not showing it here, but we've had a number of posts and conversations about market intelligence that flows both ways. My experience using, I don't know if you can see me or not, but I'm going to hold up a can of a drink. We like these. I could tell them more about it. I like this or that about it. You can actually have relationships with companies that are respectful and with information that flows both ways. It's much better than surveillance and guesswork and pushiness. An interesting fact is that we are not buying stuff most of the time, but we're using stuff all the time. I'm using this microphone. I have a mouse here. It's from Logitech. I like that mouse. I like it better than Apple's mouse. I'm on an Apple computer here. I'm using a mute button from something called Mic Mute. I kind of like the way it works. I'd like the button to be bigger. I'd like to let them know I'd like the button to be bigger. I can have a relationship with them. It doesn't have to be a high maintenance relationship. It could be a casual one. But, we can have real relationships with companies that are really productive going in both ways. We're not going to get that without MyTerms, I believe. Lawyers get new markets for services on both the buy and the sell sides of the marketplace. There are boundless possibilities when we have an intention rather than an attention economy. That's a point that Tim Berners-Lee's making in his interview that I showed earlier, that he wants us to live in an intention economy where we're the ones expressing what we actually want and where the market is a real dance between demand and supply. And this is almost too many words, but there are a lot of conversations going on here, so I'm sharing them. Developers can have a field day or a field decade with these different categories that might emerge. Agreement management platforms, migrate from today's much hated consent management platforms to new platforms. Maybe platforms are in the middle of this. We have people talking about platforms. I'm not sure we need a platform in the middle, but maybe we could have one. And maybe say if it's happening, you're on a Windows machine, Microsoft can help out there. If you're on an Apple machine, Apple can help out there. You're on an Android phone, Google can help out there. But they'll have to agree with our terms that they're not going to spy on us in the process of that. VRM tools and services. We've, fill a vacuum that's been on the web since 1995. Customer relationship management can finally be about relationship. Customer data return. This is a new term that somebody came up with, give, sell back, or share with customers the data you've been gathering. There's just an enormous amount of data that's gathered about us all the time. Our locations, who we've interacted with. Your phone knows so much about what you're doing, and all the apps on your phone, they don't know it. They're just busy sharing it. But what if we had that data? A new car comes with spyware in it, and I'm sure it's the same in where you live. But here in the U.S., if you buy a new car, it has a telephone. It has an actual phone in it. It's a cellular system. It is busy reporting on your driving. It reports it to the company that you bought it from. It reports it to, Toyota or Hyundai or Volkswagen, and they sell it or give it away to insurance companies. You don't get it. You should get it back. So the customer data return business could be huge. Platform relief, free customers into walled gardens of all those companies. Personal AI, I think, is gigantic, and there's nothing there yet. That's where you have your own AI for your own life, and not just for how you deal with companies. There's, Apple talks about Apple Intelligence, but all of them are busy thinking about how you interact with companies. But really, your contacts, your calendar, your finances, your property, your obligations, your subscriptions. These are all things we do not have much control over. And AIs are really good at dealing with unstructured data. You could flow a lot of that stuff into your personal AI, which may have a model from Meta or Google or OpenAI, but they're not operating it. You're operating it. You're using their model. Already, there are people trying to do this with the open, close enough to open source ones from Llama and so forth from Meta. And then big meshes of agents, such as what all these developers are working on. I'm not going to go into those. That's the bottom one here. But there's Kwaai, Kwaai, is a nonprofit based here in the U.S., but it's worldwide. It's small, but it's significant. I am their chief intention officer, which it's a volunteer position, but they're based on the intention economy also. And the idea there is that if you don't have enough compute power on your computer or enough storage on your computer, you could have shared storage and shared compute among many other people in the world where that could be done cryptographically and ways that protect your privacy. It's not worth going into exactly how that works, but the work is going on there. In the marketplace, we can start to see all of these. The predictions made by the intention economy come true. New dances between customers and companies and demand and supply. It's an interesting fact that the expression supply and demand was born actually in 17-something with an economist in Scotland named James Denham Stewart. And he said demand and supply, not supply and demand. And he thought that demand should drive supply, not that supply should control demand. A new commercial ecosystem that grows around a richer flow of clues in both directions based on shared interest and trust. Surveillance capitalism will be obsolesced and replaced by an economy aligned with personal agency and respect from customers and corporate partners. And you'll have real partners on the other side, rather than they call you partners because they got some data about you. A new distributed P2P fabric for personally secure and shared data processing storage. That's the last thing I talked about on the prior slide. This is okay, and that's it. So let me stop sharing, and we can go to Q&A. I hope this made sense.